Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Too Many Cards and Dice. This is your host, Ben, speaking. And here we have a deck tech for Keranos, God of Storms. I like the Theros gods because they are all indestructible enchantments. And nobody runs exile enchantments outside of Farewell, and then they never play Farewell because they don't want to hit their own stuff as collateral damage. Regardless, Keranos here is an indestructible enchantment creature, god. He's a 6/5. And the reason he is chosen, aside from colors, of course, is because of his extra ability here. Reveal the first card you draw on each of your turns. Whenever you reveal a land card, this way I draw a card. So yay, free draw. Whenever I reveal a non-land card, Keranos deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Now, in a vacuum, 3 damage ain't much, certainly not in Commander. But, as other cards in this deck will reveal, it makes a huge difference as the game goes on. And that huge difference is based on this card, Kaboom. Many Keranos decks are spell slingers. This deck really is not. The whole point for this deck is to play Kaboom, which is a 5-cost sorcery. I choose any number of target players, inevitably all my opponents. And then I reveal cards from the top of my library until I reveal a non-land card. And then I deal damage equal to that card's converted mana cost. And then I put it on the bottom of my library in any order. So in theory, you can use Kaboom to stack your deck, but that is horribly unreliable and not at all the point to this game. At least not with this deck. So anyhow, what I want to do is kill people with Kaboom. But Kaboom needs 3 things to be functional. 1, it needs solid top deck manipulation. 2, it needs damage doublers. Otherwise, what's the point? Ooh, 5 damage. Ooh, 6. No. 10, 12, or more. And then lastly, it needs things with big casting costs or converted casting costs to be worthwhile. So here we go. Top deck manipulation. I don't know that things get better than Brainstorm. Draw 3 cards, take 2 from my hand and put them on top of the library. I love Brainstorm. Well, partially because of that Ice Age art, but also because of its cost, and it's an instant. I can play it at any time and dig. But mostly I love Brainstorm because it has so many cousins. Preordain is a distant cousin, from the other bloodlines there. Scry 2, draw a card. But scrying is top deck manipulation. Serum Visions, a different cousin. Draw a card, scry 2. Again, the scry is the important part. Soothsaying. I get an enchantment that lets me shuffle my library or look at the top X cards and put them back in any order. That is a potent ability with this deck. Scroll Rack. I have one. Why not put it in here? This lovely, lovely card is not budget. And it lets me choose any number of cards in my hand and set them aside. I put an equal number of cards from the top of my library into my hand. And then I put the cards set aside this way on top. Basically, you're trading your hand for new cards. And you get to stack what goes on top in what order. Check later printings for new phrasing with all of my cards, especially the money cards. But still, this is great top deck manipulation. Telling Time, more of the same. I look at the top 3. One goes in my hand, one on the top of the library, one at the bottom. Brain Surge, draw 4, put 2 back. Crystal Ball, we're going to scry 2 for 1 mana. Now, look, there was a time in my life when I had 40 plus commander decks, and I wasn't even doing the 32 deck challenge. And every single one had a crystal ball. Because at the time in my brain, that was the top tech. Now granted, that is the same time frame that Sensei's Divining Top came out, and there's no way I could afford 1, let alone 40. So I went with Crystal Ball. Over time, those went away, except for this deck. Sin Prodder might be an odd choice because it gives my opponents an option. In addition to being a 3/2 menacing devil, at the beginning of my upkeep, I reveal the top card of my library. Any opponent may have you put that card in my graveyard, and if they do, they take damage equal to its converted mana cost. Otherwise, it goes in my hand. Now, I mentioned earlier damage doublers, and we're going to get to those. But my thought is, I'm going to get free cards, because while people may willingly eat up to 10 points of damage, they're not going to take 20 or more just to keep me from having a card. Cryptic Annelid, or Annelid. I don't know how to pronounce it. Doesn't matter. When it enters the battlefield, scry 1, then scry 2, then scry 3. So, in reality, I never get deeper than 2 cards, but those 2 cards are pretty cool. There we go. Here we have a Brainstorm on legs, because it's a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard who brainstorms when he enters. Fun with blink decks, by the by. My favorite blue card. 3 blue devotion, 5/5 flying, brainstorm on enter, and then when he dies, he gets shuffled back in, and I scry 2. And I don't know how relevant his tribes are. I don't really care. I don't play elemental decks. I don't play night decks. But wow, I love this card. If you play mono blue, do consider it. Riddle of Lightning. This is kind of like Kaboom, except it lets me hit creatures. It's an instant. But I'm paying 5 to scry 3, revealing the top card of my library and dealing damage to that creature's converted mana cost to that creature or player. That strikes me as a mini Kaboom. And lots of fun, and I love the art, so I'm winning. All right, if I am stacking the top of my deck with a whole bunch of things that cost a lot of mana, I don't want to pay full price to cast them. I want to cheat, and Gin of Wishes allows me to do so. Wow, too much rum in that glass. Anyhow, so for blue 3, I get a 4/4 flying Gin. And he enters the battlefield with 3 wish counters on it. Ooh, in another deck that could be interesting with Proliferate. Anyhow, but I pay 4 and remove a wish counter and reveal the top card of my library. And then I can play it without paying its mana cost. But if I don't play it, I exile it. In a vacuum, I don't know that this is a great thing. But if I'm stacking the top of my deck, it's an excellent thing. Especially when you see when you take into account that the average mana cost in this deck is 4.5, almost 5 mana. So, I'm winning the mana cost thing. And that at least 33 cards cost at least 5 or more mana. And here's one of them. Melek Izzet Paragon. Play with the top card of my library revealed. I can reveal it. No, I may cast it if it's an instant or sorcery. And then if I cast an instant or sorcery from the top of my library, I copy it. The dream, of course, is to play Kaboom from the top of my library with this guy. It has yet to happen, but I hold out hope. Sphinx of Zhvar Isle. He's just a 5/5 flyer with Shroud, who lets me look at the top card of my library. Kind of meh compared to other things, but looking at the top of the library is very useful here. All right, we are now into the damage doublers. I do not run all of such cards that exist, but I run a good many of them. One of my favorites being Solfeme Mayhem Dominus. And you'd better believe when I play him, I have just enough mana to pay 1 and then 4 life and discard 2 cards to make him indestructible. Now, he only doubles my non-combat damage, but Kaboom's non-combat damage, and that's the whole point of my game. So he is pretty solid. My commander is non-combat damage, and so is the Inferno Titan that you will encounter later in my deck tech. Very great card. Furnace of Wrath. clocking in at 1, red, red, red. This doubles any damage to include the damage your opponents deal. So you got to be careful with this card, and historically it has bitten me in the ass. That said, it's worth it. So worth it, and if you're a red player, you don't care about taking damage yourself. Or you shouldn't. Dictate of the Twin Gods. This one costs 3 red, red, and flashes in. But otherwise, it's Furnace of Wrath with different art. Gratuitous Violence. This one, I'm torn. This one only doubles the damage that my creatures deal. So it's not all damage. But still, I got some big thumpers in here. So for now, at least, it stays. And plus, in certain circumstances, that red, red, red 2 casting cost plays well with devotion decks. Or I guess chroma, if you use any cards that have chroma. Twin Flame Tyrant. That's right, folks. I bought a Foundations pack on a whim, and I won the lottery. So, of course, this is in here. It's a flying dragon. A pretty wimpy dragon at 3/5, but that's not why he's in here. He's in here because he doubles damage. Anything that I control, is doubled. Great card. Fiendish Duo. I was so excited when this was finally reprinted because initially you could only get it through one of those game night packs, which of course I didn't buy because the rest of it was kind of meh. Anyhow, if a source would deal damage to an opponent, it deals double that damage to that player instead. So everybody's dealing damage to each other, and it gets doubled. But when they deal it to me, I'm safe. I kind of like that. Plus, he's a 5/5 first strike and devil. Fiery Emancipation. I was thrilled to see this get reprinted in, Wilds of Eldraine. Hence this artwork. Because otherwise, I could not afford it. Or let me rephrase. I would not choose to afford to purchase one. But this one is great, easily picked up, and it triples all damage done. With pretty cool art. Angrass Marauders. It clocks in at 7 converted mana cost, and it doubles damage of sources I would control, or I do control. That 7 CMC is kind of steep in normal circumstances, but with this deck, it loves it. All right, that's not the entire deck by any stretch of the imagination. I broke it into 3 parts to make it easier to manipulate. All right. As it turns out, opponents often don't like you doing things. So I've got some protection and other aspects of the game here. I start things off with Swan Song, some very cheap counter magic. An offer I cannot refuse, or they can't refuse, more cheap counter magic. Negate, cheap mana-wise, and the fact that I think you can pick these up for less than 25 cents each. All right, Fancy Art Counterspell. The card from which all counter magic was modeled. Arguably the best counterspell. I don't know about this art, but I had 2 of them. This and the next card, Whirlwind Denial. So I figured, why not? And yeah, Whirlwind Denial. For each spell and ability your opponents control, counter it unless the opponent pays 4. Ionize. Counter target spell, deal 2 damage, or more with my doublers. All right, look, I'm a huge fan of red chaos, and few things get more chaotic than Tempt with Mayhem. So for red, red 1, this instant has a tempting offer. Choose target instant or sorcery. You know, the dream being kaboom. Each opponent may copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy they control. I then copy that spell once, plus an additional time for each opponent who copied the spell. And then I choose new targets. So if I play this, I get at least 1 copy. If people go for it, and ideally they do, I get more copies. A lovely card for almost every red deck. If you don't have any, you should get them, because they're fun. Volcanic Fallout. This is here because A, it cannot be countered, B, it's an instant, C, it deals damage to creatures and players. That, when doubled, gets pretty ridiculous. On the surface, though, in a vacuum, 2 doesn't do much except clear out tokens and utility creatures, but sometimes that can be enough. All right, chain reaction. X damage, or X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. Pretty self-explanatory. Aether Flash. I've been contemplating pulling this out, but for now at least it stays. When creatures enter play, or enter the battlefield, they take 2 damage, or 4, or 6, or more, depending on any doublers in play. All right. Sunspine Lynx, this 4-drop 5/4 elemental cat, is in here to punish people who use too many non-basic lands, which is pretty much at least 80% of the commander player base. Players cannot gain life, damage cannot be prevented, and when this enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. Full disclosure, this deck probably has the most non-basic lands in any commander deck that I currently have constructed. So this is a dangerous card, but it can be worth it. All right, Mob Verdict. Secret Council. Each player secretly votes for another player. Then those votes are revealed. For each vote an opponent received, Mob Verdict deals 2 damage to them and each creature they control. And for each vote I receive, draw a card. Note that every time I've played this or seen it played, it turns into an open table discussion about who should get how many votes, especially when damage doublers are in play. So it's a fun card. It really plays off of the multiplayer aspect of the game. It's very, very dumb if you double it and copy it with that Mayhem card from earlier. Prisoner's Dilemma is another multiplayer aimed card for 5 mana here. Each opponent secretly chooses Silence or Snitch. The choices are revealed. If each opponent chose Silence, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 4 to them. If each opponent chose Snitch, they each take 8. Otherwise, if there's a mix, it deals 12 damage to each opponent who chose Silence. And then you can flash it back. Not that that has ever mattered in my time since sticking it in here. But still, you can deal lots of damage with this card. It involves all the players, which I find the best part of a multiplayer game. Everybody gets involved. Crimson Honor Guard is not really a pet card, but it's a card I've been trying to jam in decks since picking it up back whenever it was initially printed. Anyhow, 4/5 trample, and he deals damage to players if they don't control their commander. Which doesn't sound like much, but it adds up quick. I mean, plus he's a 4/5 trampler. Brash Taunter is one of my pet cards. If I am playing a red deck, odds are very, very good that this is in there somewhere. For 5 mana, you get an indestructible 1/1 Goblin, who, whenever he's dealt damage, deals that much damage to target opponent. And then I can tap mana and him and fight another target creature. So he's a great blocker. He deals out indiscriminate damage. When there's a doubler in play, basically he's doubling. So he takes damage from the 5/5 creature, which is doubled to 10, and then he hands it out, and that 10 is doubled to 20. What's not to love? And in this deck, he actually works and then when he kabooms, it's for 5. Another pet card is Structural Assault. Destroy all artifacts, even my own. Then Structural Assault deals damage to each creature, equal to the number of artifacts that were put into graveyards and the battlefield this turn. This ends up sweeping the board, And it doesn't care if you sacrifice all your treasures and clues and food and blood tokens in response, because it still counts them as going to the graveyard. So I count this as a win because it clears the board of all those tokens, especially the treasures. Got to kill those. People do bad things when they have a hoard of treasures. Anyhow, structural assault. Explosion of riches. This is the dumb card that would otherwise not see play. I mean, because on the surface, you pay 6 for a sorcery to draw 1 card. Then each other player may draw a card, so at best you get 4 cards. Whenever a card is drawn this way, to include your own, so this triggers at least once. Explosion of Riches deals 5 damage to target opponent chosen at random. So if nothing else, you are paying 6 for sorcery speed, draw 1, deal 5 damage at random. With doublers in play, it gets ridiculous. And if people choose for the cards, and some always do, at least in my groups, the damage gets heavy when it comes to handing it out. So I love it. It fits the theme of this deck. I don't know that it fits any other deck. Red Dragon is another pet card. I pay red 4 for a dragon. He's a flying 4/4, which is kind of meh. But that enters. 4 damage to each opponent. Ideally, there is a damage doubler in play, and this is one of the reasons that I keep gratuitous violence in the deck. Because sometimes, the magic stars align, and then I'm dealing lots of damage when this guy comes into play. Spell Twine is one of the few ways in this deck to actually dig in the graveyard. And it's a sorcery for 6, so Kaboom loves it. Exile target instant or sorcery from my graveyard and 1 from another graveyard. I copy it, then I cast the copies. Depending on what your opponents are doing, this can be ridiculous. Even if not, it can be ridiculous, depending on what you've already put in the bin. Sunbird's Invocation. If you have a bunch of high casting cost cards, you want to cheat them into play. And Sunbird's Invocation does just that for 6 mana. Enchantment. When you cast that spell, reveal the top X, where X is converted to mana cost. Then cast a card that costs X or less. And then you bottom the rest in a random order. It kabooms well at 6. Inferno Titan. Plays nice with the damage doublers. And he costs 6, and he's a 6/6. When the cards align, this card is ridiculous. All right, Ovika, Enigma Goliath. Probably does not want to be in this deck, but it's in here because it costs 7, which is great kaboom. And it's really tough to get rid of. Someone's got to pay 3 extra and 3 life, or block it with 6/6. The fact that it makes goblin tokens is extra. If I get tokens out of this, that's great. Mostly, I want a giant monster that is hard to kill, or it kabooms for a lot. Diluvian Primordial is kind of like Spell Twine with wings, except I look at each opponent's graveyard instead of my own. And then I cast those cards. Drakuseth, Maw Flames. If you play any red deck with damage doublers, you really need to consider adding Drakuseth here, because his 7/7 flyingness is doubled. So is whenever he deals damage, or whenever he attacks, dealing that 4 and 3 and 3 becomes 8 and 6 and 6. This card is ridiculous with even 1 damage doubler in play. Coastal Breach. Undaunted. Costs 7 on the surface there. The reality is you'll most likely pay less. He returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. 1 with the Multiverse. You're paying 8 total for this enchantment. To look at the top of your library, to play stuff for free? Excuse me. And even if you're not playing them for free, You can still cast them off the top. This seems like a great home for this deck. Myojin of Cryptic Dreams. I have yet to see this actually hit play, but in theory, I have lots and lots of permanents that it could make 3 copies of. So I am excited based on that. But until then, he'll kaboom for a lot. Stormtide Leviathan. If you are running mono blue, especially on a budget, this card is great. All lands are islands. Creatures without flying or island walk cannot attack. I mean, most decks run something with flying, but it's not always a theme. Very few cards exist, comparatively, with island walk, so you're safe there. So if you're running mono blue and you can drop Stormtide, you could really hammer people. If you are in this deck and you drop Stormtide, well, I mean, it costs 8. Kaboom loves it. And then with my damage, even without my damage doublers, he's thumping people and he's providing some passive defense. Treasure Cruise. Of course, everyone delves to play this sorcery. But as far as Kaboom is concerned, it cost 8. That's a lot of damage. Speaking of things that cost 8, Insurrection. Untap all creatures and gain control of them until end of turn. They gain haste until end of turn. This can win games outright, depending on what's in the field. The sub-game with this becomes figuring out who to attack who with what in order to clear out all 3 opponents at once. All right, Blasphemous Act. And this counts as 9 for Kaboom, even though you and I both know that it will rarely cost more than 2 or 3 to cast. Still not done. I've got the mana rocks and the lands to go. All right. Soul Ring, because Soul Ring. Talisman of Creativity. It's the colors. It's really useful. Is it Signet? Also useful. Thought Vessel. You're going to end up drawing a lot of cards that you cannot immediately cast because of the casting cost of this deck. Arcane Signet. Thran Dynamo. You know what helps cast giant things? Rocks like Thran Dynamo. Same argument goes for Gilded Lotus. Bonus, Kabooming Gilded Lotus is kind of nice. All right, now we are at the lands. Of course, Command Tower, Ferris Lake, Shivan Reef, Temple of Epiphany, Sulphur Falls, Training Center, Steam Vents, Eroded Canyon, Is It Boiler Works, Cascade Bluffs, Surtland Frostfire, which is really only in here because it could potentially deal damage, potentially a lot of damage, to creatures. Mirror Pool, because it copies instant sorceries or even creatures. Emergent Zone. I can flash in a sorcery. I've yet to even see it hit play, so I don't know. Shivan Gorge plays very well with any damage doublers. So if you're running damage doublers, that means you're in red. That means you can add Shivan Gorge without much issue. Reliquary Tower. This is why I run Thought Vessel. I've got so many high-costed cards, and I don't want to discard them. I probably won't get to play them, but maybe I will. But I can only play them if they're in my hand. So it's in here. I know, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse. I mean, go fetch your basic that you need. Halimar Depths. I like this one. Look at the top of my library, put it back in any order. Plays well with so many parts of the deck. And then basic lands. I got islands. Ooh, I have islands and I have mountains. But in addition to mountains, I have Spine Rock Knoll. Hideaway, if I deal 7 or more damage to an opponent, I can kick it out. There's 9 islands and 8 mountains in here. The deck list itself should be down in the comments and is also on Archidect, which is my current thing of choice there. I know the deck needs Graveyard Hate. I know other damage doublers exist. I know Mirari exists. I have a very, very, very strong temptation to add Hivemind to embrace the chaos factor, but I have yet to do so. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you stole some ideas from it. If you build it or use any of the ideas, do let me know. And of course, as always, like and subscribe. Thank you.